Two worlds collided. One shattered, the other ascended. Rome and Greece, locked in a struggle that would decide the fate of civilization itself. Before you scroll away, understand this. The war you're about to witness didn't just shape Rome and Greece. It shaped the world you live in today. Rome conquered Greece with swords. Greece conquered Rome with words. Stay with me, because what happened here will shock you, haunt you, and change the way you see history forever. The ground trembles beneath marching feet. Shields strike in rhythm, iron edges kissing wood with each step, a thunder that rolls like distant storms. The air is heavy with the scent of sweat, iron, and trampled earth. This is not peace. This is the world on the edge of transformation. Rome, once a city carved from marshland and legend, now stretches its ambitions across mountains and seas. Greece, ancient and proud, stands in its path, a cradle of philosophy, art, and war. Yet in this moment, there are no statues of marble, no verses of Homer recited by firelight. Only the clash of bronze, the glint of sunlight on spear tips, and the silent prayer of men who know the day may end in silence. The year is 197 BCE. At Cynoscephalae, the hills of Thessaly become the stage for an empire's birth. The Macedonian phalanx, its long sarissas bristling like a wall of thorns, faces Rome's manipular legions, a machine of flexibility forged in Italy's brutal wars. The world holds its breath. But to understand this moment, one must first step back into the chaos that made it possible. Rome did not begin as an empire destined for glory. It began as a survivor. Centuries of conflict against Etruscans, Samnites, and Carthaginians hardened the Republic into steel. Its legions bled in foreign soil long before Greece ever heard their war horns. And yet, the Mediterranean was not Rome's alone. To the east, the heirs of Alexander, Macedon, the Seleucids, and the fractured kingdoms of the Hellenistic age claimed power through conquest and kingship. Greece stood divided, proud yet vulnerable, looking back on the age of Pericles while struggling to survive the shadow of empire. What follows is not merely a war of armies, it is a struggle of worlds. On one side, the disciplined, unyielding structure of Rome, born from civic duty and honed in relentless war. On the other, the brilliance of Hellenic warfare, forged in phalanxes that once conquered Persia. This is not simply about land, but about destiny. The clash begins with whispers, Illyrian pirates disrupting trade across the Adriatic. Rome, once content with Italian soil, sends ships eastward. The Greeks watch cautiously, uncertain whether this rising republic is protector or predator. The spark is lit in the First Illyrian War. From there, the fire spreads. By the time the sun rises over Cynoscephalae, the Mediterranean is already in motion. Treaties have been signed, betrayals whispered, alliances broken in the dead of night. Macedonian kings gamble with Rome's patience. City-states waver between freedom and subjugation. Armies march not just for land, but for survival. And in the middle of it all stands the soldier. He grips his shield with calloused hands, the leather straps slick with sweat. His spear feels heavy, though battle has yet to begin. He can hear the faint calls of birds above the din, unaware that by nightfall, the field below will be a graveyard. For him, this is not the story of empires. It is the story of whether he will live to see another dawn. This is the opening image of a century-long struggle. Rome against Greece, the rise of a republic into empire, the fall of kingdoms that once claimed divine descent. Blood on the hills of Thessaly, echoing back to the narrow passes of Thermopylae and forward to the marble forums of Rome. The story you are about to witness is not a tale of inevitability. It is a tale of chance, courage, betrayal, and the will to survive. It is the story of how Rome, a city of stone and ambition, reached across the sea and seized the heart of the Greek world. This is the beginning.
The Mediterranean in the 3rd century BCE was a patchwork of ambition. Kingdoms rose from the ashes of Alexander the Great's conquests, each claiming a fragment of his legacy. Macedon stood proud, its kings heirs to Philip and Alexander, guardians of the mighty phalanx whose spears once stretched from Greece to the edge of India. To the east, the Seleucid Empire sprawled across Anatolia, Syria, and Mesopotamia, vast but fragile, stretched thin over deserts and mountains. Southward, Egypt was ruled by the Ptolemies, a dynasty of Macedonian pharaohs who balanced their Greek blood with Egyptian crowns. Greece itself was fractured. Once united under the brilliance of Athens and Sparta, it had splintered into leagues and alliances. The Aetolian League, restless and predatory, played the game of opportunism, raiding neighbors and selling alliances to the highest bidder. The Achaean League, idealistic yet pragmatic, dreamed of unity but often bent beneath the pressure of stronger powers. City-states like Sparta clung to fading glory, their laws and traditions relics of another age. The land that had birthed philosophy, drama, and democracy now found itself overshadowed by monarchs and mercenaries. To the west, beyond the Adriatic Sea, Rome grew stronger with every war it survived. Once a city-state locked in battle with its Italian neighbors, the Republic had learned resilience the hard way. 3 Samnite wars had taught Rome how to fight in mountains and valleys, how to outlast enemies with discipline and sheer determination. Against Pyrrhus of Epirus, the Romans had faced Greek warfare firsthand. They had lost battles, yes, but they had learned lessons. Even Pyrrhus, victor at Heraclea and Asculum, admitted bitterly that another such victory would destroy him. For Rome, defeat was not the end. It was the beginning of adaptation. The Punic Wars against Carthage forged Rome into something more than a regional power. Hannibal's elephants had marched across the Alps, striking terror into the Italian heartland. Cities burned, legions were annihilated at Cannae, and for years Rome teetered on the edge of collapse. Yet the Republic endured. By 201 BCE, Rome emerged bloodied but unbroken, master of the western Mediterranean. Carthage was humbled, its fleets dismantled, its empire stripped away. But victory came at a cost. Rome's legions, seasoned and relentless, were now accustomed to fighting far from home, across seas, against enemies with strange weapons and tactics. This new Rome no longer looked inward. It looked across the Adriatic. And there it saw Greece. But Greece did not see Rome as inevitable. To many Greeks, Rome was an upstart, barbarous, practical, devoid of the refinement that marked Hellenic civilization. They had philosophers, theaters, and marble temples. Rome had laws, roads, and a hunger for power. The contrast could not be sharper. One world rooted in ideas, the other in pragmatism. And yet both shared a relentless belief in destiny. The Adriatic became the first bridge. Pirates in Illyria harassed Roman traders, seizing ships and enslaving crews. The Senate, unwilling to tolerate threats to its commerce, dispatched fleets. In 229 BCE, the First Illyrian War began. Rome did not simply crush piracy, it planted its flag in the Balkans. Greek cities watched carefully, some with suspicion, others with quiet relief. For the first time, Rome's legions touched Greek soil. From this foothold, tensions grew. Macedon, under King Philip V, eyed Rome warily. Allied with Carthage during the Second Punic War, Philip sought to expand his influence in the Aegean. Rome, never forgiving betrayal, prepared its legions once more. Thus began the First Macedonian War. But wars were not fought only on battlefields. They were fought in the halls of diplomacy, in whispered promises and fragile treaties. Greek envoys traveled between capitals, weighing the odds, choosing sides. Some cities leaned toward Macedon, fearing Rome's rise. Others turned westward, desperate for protection against Macedonian domination. It was a world of shifting loyalties, where every city-state balanced freedom against survival. For Rome, it was opportunity. For Greece, it was the beginning of an unraveling. The stage was set. Macedon's kings believed their phalanx, perfected since the days of Alexander, would hold against any foe. Rome's generals believed their flexible manipular system, forged through centuries of war, could break any formation. The collision was inevitable. Before the clash, the Mediterranean felt like a storm before thunder. Armies drilled, alliances hardened, and spies whispered of betrayal. Merchants carried rumors as quickly as they carried goods. The sea lanes hummed with tension, the roads shook with marching feet. Everyone knew change was coming. No one yet knew how final it would be. The air of the eastern Mediterranean thickened with unease. Trade routes that once carried amphorae of wine and jars of oil now carried whispers of war. Sailors spoke of Roman triremes patrolling waters once thought safe. Merchants muttered of Macedonian horsemen raiding villages on the fringes of Greece. In the great markets of Corinth and Athens, men leaned closer across the stalls, voices low, speculating whether this new power from the west was a savior or a destroyer. The threat was not a single army marching across a plain, nor a single king declaring conquest. It was something subtler, more insidious, the gradual tightening of a vice around the fragile body of Greece. Rome had proven its resilience in the west. But in Greece, Rome was still an intruder, a foreigner whose strength was untested against the phalanx, the spear wall that had once broken the Persian host and carved empires under Alexander. To many, it seemed unthinkable that men from the Italian hills, barely a century removed from fighting tribal enemies, could stand against the weight of Macedonian tradition. Yet Rome's presence could not be ignored. The first signs came with Illyria. Pirates, hardened seafarers of the Adriatic, preyed on Greek and Roman merchants alike. Their ships, fast and shallow-keeled, struck without warning, dragging sailors into captivity and looting cargo. But Rome's intervention against them in 229 BCE was no simple act of protection. It marked a declaration: the Republic would not tolerate threats to its commerce. Illyria was brought to heel, its coastline dotted with Roman garrisons, its kings reduced to clients. For the first time, a Roman army had crossed into the Balkan world. To the Greeks, this was not rescue, it was a warning. Rome was here, and Rome did not leave. Macedon, under King Philip V, watched with growing alarm. The kingdom that had once ruled under Alexander now clung to its legacy through its phalanx and its cavalry, the companion horsemen that had thundered across Asia a century before. Philip saw Rome's rise with suspicion and contempt. To him, Rome was still provincial, a republic of farmers masquerading as conquerors. But in his heart, he knew that Rome's strength lay not in a single general nor in the charisma of a monarch. Its strength lay in the stubborn will of a people who refused defeat. During the Second Punic War, Philip revealed his intent. While Hannibal marched across Italy, Philip signed a treaty with Carthage, gambling that if Rome fell, Macedon could inherit dominance over the Adriatic and the Aegean. It was a bold move, but a dangerous one. Rome never forgot betrayal. Even as Hannibal fought at Cannae, even as flames licked the fields of southern Italy, Roman senators etched Philip's name into memory. When Carthage fell, the reckoning would come. The First Macedonian War that followed was indecisive. Roman legions, stretched thin across Italy, Spain, and Sicily, could not yet bring full weight against Macedon. Yet even this early clash revealed something alarming to the Greeks: Rome did not need victory to remain dangerous. Rome's legions could appear suddenly, allies at their side, pressing Macedon from unexpected directions. The phalanx was formidable, but rigid. Rome was patient, adaptable, relentless. For the smaller Greek states, the danger was not abstract. It was immediate. The Aetolian League, opportunistic and restless, allied with Rome against Philip, raiding Macedonian territory. The Achaean League wavered, torn between fear of Macedon and distrust of Rome. Athens, long past its age of empire, leaned toward Rome as a protector, hoping to preserve a sliver of autonomy. Each decision divided the Greek world further. No single city could resist Macedon alone. No league could stand against Rome unaided. And so they gambled, aligning with whichever power seemed less dangerous in the moment, knowing all the while that their choices might doom them later. The threat was no longer limited to politics. It was visible in the fields and harbors of Greece. Villages on the Macedonian frontier felt the ground shake beneath the hooves of raiding cavalry. Fishermen returning from the Aegean found their nets cut by pirate blades. Farmers whispered of levies demanded by kings and tribute extracted by foreign soldiers. Every harvest, every voyage, every coin minted carried with it the weight of uncertainty. Archaeological evidence bears witness to this tension. Fortifications across central Greece were reinforced in this era, their stone walls rebuilt, their towers raised higher. Inscriptions from city councils record frantic debates over alliances, treaties, and defensive measures. Burial sites tell of men cut down in their prime, their bones bearing the marks of spear thrusts and sword cuts. Coins minted in Athens and Rhodes show imagery of strength and unity, attempts to project confidence in a time of fear. These are not the traces of a stable age. They are the shadows of a world bracing for impact. And yet, the threat was not simply military. It was cultural. Rome admired Greece, its art, its philosophy, its gods. But admiration can be dangerous. For the Greeks, Roman interest was a double-edged sword. It promised patronage, trade, and protection, but beneath it lay conquest. A people who borrowed your gods and studied your philosophers could also strip you of your freedom. For the Greeks, the greatest danger was not that Rome would destroy them with fire and sword, but that Rome would consume them, taking their brilliance and leaving them hollow. By the dawn of the 2nd century BCE, the storm clouds had gathered. Rome had tested its strength against Carthage and prevailed. Macedon had gambled on Rome's destruction and failed. The Greek world stood divided, its leagues and city-states entangled in a web of shifting loyalties. The Adriatic no longer separated Greece from Rome. It connected them. The threat had emerged. Not as a sudden strike, but as a tide rising slowly, inexorably. And when it reached its height, the world of Greece would never be the same. The storm was coming, but neither Rome nor Greece knew when it would break. The threat lingered like a gathering thundercloud, its edges darkening the horizon, its silence heavy. And in that silence, both sides prepared. For Rome, survival was more than instinct. It was a system, a discipline carved into the marrow of its citizens. Every Roman knew his place in war, because war was not an exception, it was life itself. The Republic's strength lay not in the brilliance of one man, but in the machinery of its legions. Each soldier was a cog in a greater design, trained to fight not as an individual but as part of a relentless organism. The manipular system, born in the Samnite Wars and tempered against Pyrrhus and Hannibal, became Rome's weapon of survival. Unlike the rigid Macedonian phalanx, whose bristling forest of sarissas could crush an enemy head-on but faltered on uneven ground, the Roman maniples moved like flowing water. Soldiers fought in small units, each capable of maneuvering independently, advancing, retreating, or flanking as needed. Flexibility was survival. Adaptation was Rome's creed. Archaeological finds, iron pila with their long, slender shafts designed to bend upon impact, shields large enough to form a wall yet light enough to move quickly, helmets reinforced with bronze cheek guards, all reveal a people who expected to fight at close quarters. Roman armor was not ornate, but practical. A breastplate hammered from iron, a gladius sharpened to pierce rather than slash, sandals studded with hobnails for traction on mud or stone. These were not weapons of beauty. They were weapons of survival, forged for men who expected the fight to come again and again. But survival for Rome was not only military. It was diplomatic. The Republic's Senate learned to weave alliances as carefully as it laid roads. Envoys crossed the Adriatic with promises and threats, offering protection to Greek cities wary of Macedon. Athens, Rhodes, and Pergamon became Rome's partners, not out of love, but out of fear. Rome positioned itself as the guarantor of Greek freedom against the tyranny of kings. And yet, in every treaty signed, in every pledge given, Rome tightened its grip. Each ally became a stepping stone. Each alliance became a foothold. In Macedon, survival strategies took a different form. Philip V, and later his son Perseus, placed their faith in the phalanx. 16 men deep, each armed with a sarissa nearly 5 meters long, the phalanx was a living wall of steel. On flat ground, it was nearly impenetrable, the weight of its advance pressing like an iron tide. Macedon had crushed Persia with this weapon, had carved empires across Asia, had earned immortality under Alexander. And now, its kings believed it could hold against Rome. Yet the phalanx was more than a tactic. It was a symbol, a reminder that Macedon's survival depended on the weight of tradition. To abandon it was to admit decline. To wield it was to call upon the shadow of Alexander himself. Archaeological depictions, carved reliefs showing soldiers locked shoulder to shoulder, fragments of sarissas unearthed in burial grounds, bronze helmets adorned with horsehair crests, all speak of a kingdom clinging to its martial heritage as its shield against Rome. But Macedon's survival depended not only on its spears. It relied on the swift hooves of its cavalry. The companion horsemen, once the hammer to the phalanx's anvil, were still feared across Greece. Archaeological finds of ornate saddlery and spurred boots testify to a tradition of mounted dominance. Philip trained his cavalry to strike where the phalanx could not reach, to protect the flanks, to deliver the killing blow. In his eyes, survival was in unity, the wall of spears and the thunder of hooves. The Greek leagues, however, knew survival meant something else. The Aetolians, opportunistic raiders, placed their hope in mobility, light infantry, slingers, and archers darting across hills and valleys. The Achaeans tried to survive through unity, binding city-states together in fragile alliances. Rhodes, master of the seas, relied on its fleet, the triremes and quadriremes that patrolled the Aegean, safeguarding trade routes and deterring Macedonian expansion. Each strategy reflected a different understanding of survival. For some, it meant adaptation; for others, endurance; for others still, withdrawal into isolation. The ordinary people felt this looming danger most keenly. Farmers strengthened village walls, building watchtowers on hillsides to spot raiders. Inscriptions show councils levying heavier taxes to fund mercenaries, demanding grain, silver, and sons for war. Burials from this era reveal hurried interments, men cut down in the prime of life, sometimes with weapons still beside them. Survival was not abstract. It was the daily calculation of whether a family's harvest would be stolen, whether a son would return from war, whether the city walls would hold. Cultural survival became a weapon, too. Greek philosophers debated Rome's rise, some dismissing it as a passing power, others warning that the Republic's discipline was unlike anything Greece had faced before. Dramatists and poets lamented decline, comparing their age to the glories of Marathon and Salamis, where Greeks had once stood united against Persia. In temples, priests offered sacrifices to the old gods, praying for protection, yet even religion became a battleground. Rome adopted Greek deities into its own pantheon, renaming them, reshaping them. To many Greeks, this was not reverence, it was theft. Their survival, they feared, would not only be threatened on the battlefield but also in the realm of identity. Everywhere, the signs of preparation were visible. Cities stockpiled grain, smiths hammered spears and shields day and night, fleets were built in secret harbors. And yet beneath all this, uncertainty remained. Could the phalanx still dominate as it had in the days of Alexander? Could Rome's maniples, trained to fight in the hills of Italy and the deserts of Spain, adapt to the rugged plains of Greece? Would alliances hold, or would betrayal tip the balance? The Mediterranean had become a chessboard, every piece positioned for survival, every move calculated against the threat of annihilation. But survival is not victory. Survival is the pause before the clash, the deep breath before the plunge. Both Rome and Greece had prepared. Both believed their strategies would carry them through. Yet neither could know how those strategies would be tested when the first spears struck shields and the first pila darkened the sky. The stage was ready. The tension could not stretch further. What began as whispers and preparations was about to erupt into the roar of battle. The silence broke with the sound of horns. Across the hills of Thessaly in 197 BCE, the morning mist clung to the earth like a shroud. Dew glistened on wild grasses, hiding the contours of uneven ground. Birds scattered from the ridges as the Macedonian phalanx advanced, its spears thrust forward in a single glittering wall of death. 16 men deep, thousands wide, the sarissas bristled like a living forest, their bronze tips glinting in the rising sun. The Macedonian soldiers moved as one, their sandals striking the soil in unison, the sound like the heartbeat of an iron giant. To their right, horsemen pawed at the earth, snorting, restless, eager for the charge. Philip V, king of Macedon, placed his faith in this formation, just as his ancestors had, believing that the weight of tradition could not be broken. On the opposite ridge, the Roman legions prepared. They were not a wall of men but a mosaic, maniples arranged in a checkerboard pattern, each a block of discipline and flexibility. Their pila were gripped tightly, long iron shafts ending in narrow points designed not to kill, but to cripple shields and render them useless. Their scuda, broad curved shields, rested against their shoulders like walls. Behind them, the short gladii waited, weapons of close, brutal combat. For a moment, the two worlds stared across the hills. The old age and the new. Tradition and adaptation. The phalanx and the legion. The clash came swiftly. The Macedonian sarissas drove forward, pressing hard into the Roman front line. The first maniples staggered under the weight of the assault, shields shuddering as iron tips bit into wood and flesh. Men fell screaming, pinned where they stood. The phalanx was working. For centuries, it had shattered foes with sheer momentum, and now it threatened to do the same again. But then the ground betrayed them. Cynoscephalae was not a flat plain but a ridge cut by slopes and gullies. The phalanx, mighty on level earth, began to splinter as its ranks struggled over uneven terrain. Gaps opened between its files, small at first, then widening. And in those gaps, the Romans struck. The maniples moved like water, flowing into the cracks, cutting into the sides of the phalanx. Pila rained down, piercing shields, bending upon impact, weighing them down. Soldiers dropped their defenses, scrambling in confusion as gladii thrust into their ribs. What had been a wall now became a patchwork of broken lines. The phalanx could only move forward, it could not turn, it could not bend. And in that rigidity lay its doom. Polybius records that it was here Rome's flexibility proved decisive. One legion, seeing the exposed flank of the Macedonians, turned inward and struck from the side. The Macedonians, still pressing forward on the other wing, did not even know their rear was collapsing. Trapped between the iron forest ahead and the Roman blades within, the phalanx fell apart. When the dust cleared, thousands lay dead. The hills of Thessaly were littered with broken sarissas, shattered shields, and the bodies of men who had once marched behind the shadow of Alexander. The Battle of Cynoscephalae was more than a victory. It was proof. Proof that the phalanx, the weapon that had conquered the known world, could be broken. Proof that Rome's legions, adaptable and relentless, had found their answer to Macedon. But the confrontation did not end there. Greece was not one battle, but many. In 191 BCE, the war spread southward. At Thermopylae, the very pass where Leonidas and his Spartans had once defied Persia, the Seleucid king Antiochus III attempted to bar Rome's advance. He fortified the pass with walls, trenches, and elephants, calling upon the memory of ancient heroism. But Rome did not falter. Legionaries stormed the defenses, scaling walls, cutting through the defenders. Antiochus's elephants, once symbols of terror, panicked under Roman missiles and trampled their own men. The ghosts of Thermopylae wept as the pass fell, not to Persians this time, but to Romans. The wars spread to the sea. At Caracas and Myonnesus, Antiochus's fleets clashed with Rome and its Rhodian allies. The Mediterranean thundered with rams striking hulls, with flaming missiles hissing into the night. Archaeological wrecks of these battles, discovered off the coasts of Turkey, reveal splintered timbers and bronze rams, silent witnesses to the day Rome learned to master the sea once ruled by Greeks. And still the confrontation escalated. At Magnesia in 190 BCE, the Seleucid army assembled in its full strength, phalanxes gleaming, cavalry massed, war elephants towering over the field. The plain shook with the weight of thousands. Yet Rome, under Lucius Scipio, adapted again. Manipular flexibility unraveled the massive formation, Pila broke shields, and discipline held firm. When the Seleucid line collapsed, it shattered an empire. Antiochus fled eastward, and the Seleucid dream of dominating Greece dissolved in blood. But the final blow came at Pydna in 168 BCE. King Perseus of Macedon, son of Philip V, faced Rome in a last desperate bid to preserve Macedonian independence. Once more, the phalanx bristled, once more the sarissas gleamed. And once more the terrain betrayed them. The Roman legions exploited every slope, every crevice, every weakness. As Polybius describes, the clash became slaughter. The phalanx, magnificent yet inflexible, broke apart. Perseus fled. Macedon fell. Archaeological evidence at Pydna confirms the devastation: iron spearheads, bronze helmets caved by Roman swords, burial pits of soldiers still clutching their sarissas in death. The bones tell the story of men trapped in formation, unable to adapt, butchered by an enemy that moved with terrible precision. With Pydna, the confrontation ended not with a treaty, but with annihilation. Macedon was stripped of its kingdom, its royal line humiliated. Greece was no longer the master of its fate. Rome had proven not only that it could fight Greek armies, but that it could destroy them. This was more than war. It was the shattering of a world order. The old ways, the phalanx, the glory of kings, the fragmented leagues of Greece, had collided with Rome's new order of discipline, adaptation, and iron will. And in that collision, Greece bled. The confrontation had begun as whispers in council halls, as alliances and raids. It ended in battlefields strewn with corpses, in seas dotted with sinking hulls, in cities trembling under Roman banners. From Cynoscephalae to Thermopylae, from Magnesia to Pydna, the confrontation was a chain of blows, each heavier, each more final. And with each strike, Rome carved itself deeper into the heart of Greece. The clash of Rome and Greece was not only the meeting of armies. It was the grinding of entire worlds. And in those worlds lived people, ordinary Greeks whose lives were ripped apart by wars they did not choose. Cynoscephalae, 197 BCE. At Cynoscephalae, the roar of battle drowned the morning birds. From the slopes above the battlefield, shepherds and villagers watched in horror as dust clouds rose, as the ground shook with the tread of thousands. To them, the sight was both familiar and alien. They had grown up hearing tales of Alexander's victories, of the phalanx sweeping across Asia, of horses thundering like storms. But here, on their own soil, the phalanx faltered. They saw men crushed beneath falling sarissas, soldiers tangled in their own formations as Roman maniples sliced into their flanks. They saw the Romans, armored and grim, advancing not with the flourish of Greek warriors but with the precision of a machine. Every villager who watched knew the meaning: if Macedon could not stop Rome, who could? When the dust cleared, the hills were carpeted in corpses. Archaeologists tell us of mass graves dug hastily, pits where men were buried together, armor still on their bodies. For villagers, the battlefield was not glory, it was scavenging. Women crept down at night, searching the dead for sons, brothers, husbands. Farmers dragged bodies to shallow ditches to keep wolves at bay. The smell of rot hung over Thessaly for weeks. Cynoscephalae was remembered by Romans as a triumph. By Greeks, it was remembered as a wound. Thermopylae, 191 BCE. For centuries earlier, Leonidas and his 300 had stood in this narrow pass, defying Persia. Now Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire tried to rekindle that fire, fortifying the very soil of legend. Villagers from nearby towns were forced to dig trenches and carry stones, building defenses they knew might collapse. When the Romans came, the pass that had once symbolized resistance became a graveyard. Antiochus's elephants, meant to terrify, screamed as Roman missiles pierced their hides, thrashing and trampling the men they were meant to protect. Greek farmers who had been pressed into service as camp followers fled into the mountains, carrying only what they could on their backs. The Romans stormed the pass, and Thermopylae, once a shrine of sacrifice, became another step in Rome's advance. For ordinary Greeks, the message was clear: even the soil of heroes could no longer save them. The seas of Greece, 190 BCE. On the waters off Asia Minor, the battle spread to the sea. The great naval clash at Myonnesus echoed across the Aegean. Roman and Rhodian ships cut into the Seleucid fleet, rams shattering hulls, boarding parties swarming decks. Flames leapt skyward as ships burned, their screams carrying across the water. For Greek sailors pressed into these wars, survival meant leaping into the sea, clutching broken planks, praying to Poseidon. Archaeological dives off the Turkish coast reveal their fate: splintered timbers, amphorae frozen in the seabed, bronze rams with jagged edges. The sea became another battlefield, and even those who never marched with legions or phalanxes were drawn into the storm. Magnesia, 190 BCE. At Magnesia, the Seleucid army assembled in a spectacle meant to overwhelm. Tens of thousands of soldiers stretched across the plain, their bronze gleaming in the sun. War elephants towered, adorned with bells and painted patterns, their tusks capped in iron. Greek peasants conscripted into the ranks stood shoulder to shoulder with mercenaries from Asia, their eyes wide with fear as the Roman legions advanced. But the discipline of Rome did not break. The manipular system moved like gears, grinding inexorably forward. Elephants panicked under a rain of missiles, crashing into friendly lines. Farmers conscripted into the phalanx were trampled where they stood, crushed not by Roman swords but by their own panicked beasts. When the Seleucid army broke, it broke completely. The peasants who fled were hunted across the plain, their villages left defenseless. Rome had not just defeated an army. It had shattered an empire's illusion of safety. Pydna, 168 BCE, the end of Macedon. The final confrontation came at Pydna. King Perseus, desperate to preserve his father's legacy, arrayed the Macedonian phalanx one last time. As the sun set, the sarissas gleamed like a forest of death. Ordinary Macedonian farmers, pressed into service, gripped their spears with trembling hands. Children of villages stood on the hillsides, clutching their mothers' skirts, watching fathers march toward fate. The phalanx surged forward, overwhelming the first Roman lines. For a moment, it seemed the old power still lived. But the terrain, uneven, cut with ditches and slopes, betrayed them again. The formation splintered. Romans darted into the gaps, cutting, stabbing, thrusting their gladii into exposed flanks. The Macedonians could not turn, could not adapt. Men screamed as they were butchered in their ranks, trapped like animals. Polybius writes that when the phalanx collapsed, it collapsed utterly. Archaeological digs at Pydna reveal the truth. Spearheads bent and broken, shields shattered, helmets split by Roman swords. Burial pits hold skeletons still clutching sarissas, their bones scored by gladius wounds. Villagers who survived told of fields soaked in blood, of corpses stacked in heaps taller than a man, of vultures circling for days. For ordinary Greeks, Pydna was not the death of a king. It was the death of their world. The confrontation ended not in glory, but in silence. When the dust settled, Macedon was broken. Its kings humbled, its armies annihilated, its phalanx revealed as obsolete. The four kingdoms that Rome carved from its body were little more than clients, shadows of independence. For the Greek city-states, the aftermath was worse. Rome proclaimed itself the defender of Greek freedom, but freedom came with chains. Tributes were demanded. Hostages, often the sons of leading families, were taken to Rome as guarantees of loyalty. Among them was a young prince named Perseus, paraded in chains through the streets of Rome, his humiliation a spectacle for the Republic. Villages bore the cost most of all. Farmers whose sons had died at Cynoscephalae or Pydna now faced Roman tax collectors. Harvests were seized to feed legions. Coins bearing the faces of Greek kings gave way to those stamped with Roman symbols. Temples once filled with offerings to Zeus and Apollo now echoed with the Latin prayers of Roman officers. Archaeology confirms this transformation. Inscriptions show decrees of surrender, carved into stone by trembling councils. Temples in Corinth and Athens display dedications to Roman officials alongside the old gods. Burials from this period reveal not warriors, but families broken by famine and tax burdens, graves containing women and children who had starved in the wake of Roman requisitions. Yet the aftermath was not only destruction. Rome admired Greek culture even as it conquered it. Greek philosophers were invited to Rome, their teachings shaping Roman thought. Greek sculptors carved for Roman patrons. Greek tutors raised Roman sons. Slowly, painfully, the brilliance of Greece was absorbed into the body of Rome. The conqueror took not only land but identity. For ordinary Greeks, however, survival remained bitter. They were no longer citizens of proud polis or soldiers of mighty kings. They were subjects in a world where decisions were made in the Senate, across the sea. Their gods, their art, their language endured, but their freedom did not. The aftermath of Rome's conquest of Greece was not a single moment, but a long shadow. It lingered in the ruins of villages abandoned after war, in the inscriptions recording surrender, in the bones of the fallen buried without rites. It lingered in the silence of fields once filled with marching men, now empty but for the wind. This was the cost of survival. Greece survived. But as a memory, a culture within another's empire. Rome had not destroyed Greece's brilliance. It had devoured it. The dust of battle settles, but its echoes never fade. The hills of Thessaly, where the phalanx first broke at Cynoscephalae, still bear the scars of war, fragments of bronze buried in the soil, spearheads rusting beneath the roots of olive trees. The narrow pass at Thermopylae, once a shrine to defiance, now whispers of two defeats, one against Persia, the other against Rome. The plain of Magnesia, littered with the bones of men and elephants, lies silent beneath the plow. And at Pydna, where Macedon died, archaeologists uncover skeletons still clutching sarissas, as though refusing to release the past. Rome's conquest of Greece was more than a series of victories. It was the triumph of adaptation over tradition, of flexibility over rigidity. The phalanx, once unstoppable, could not bend. Rome, forged in the crucible of endless wars, bent without breaking, adapted without fear. That is why it prevailed. But this is not only the story of armies. It is the story of people. For the farmer in Thessaly who lost his sons to the phalanx, Rome's victory meant empty fields and a lineage cut short. For the sailor whose ship was rammed at Myonnesus, it meant drowning in sight of the coast he had called home. For the mother who watched her child taken to Rome as a hostage, it meant survival bought at the cost of freedom. Their names are forgotten, but their pain is written in the silence that followed conquest. And yet, even in defeat, Greece endured. Rome conquered Greece, but it could not erase it. The marble statues, the plays of Euripides, the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, all became Roman treasures. Senators quoted Homer, generals carried Greek tutors for their sons, Roman temples echoed with Greek forms. Cicero would later write that Rome had captured Greece, but Greece had captured Rome's spirit. It was true. In conquest, Greece lost its freedom but preserved its brilliance by passing it into the body of its conqueror. This duality is the haunting truth of history. Survival does not always mean independence. Sometimes it means transformation. Greece lived on, not as a sovereign power, but as an idea, woven into the heart of Rome and, through Rome, into the heart of the world. The reflection is not only for the past. It is for us. Every empire faces its cynoscephalae, its Pydna, moments where survival depends not on strength alone but on the willingness to adapt. Rome rose because it learned. Macedon fell because it did not. And we, centuries later, must ask, when the storm gathers in our own world, will we cling to tradition, or will we bend and adapt to survive? The story of Rome's conquest of Greece is not a tale of inevitability. It is a mirror. In its blood and silence, it asks us, how do civilizations endure? What do they surrender to survive? And what do they lose in the process? The camera pans out now, across the Mediterranean, its waters calm once more. But beneath the surface lies the weight of history, rusted spearheads, shattered amphorae, sunken rams. Every wave that touches the Greek coast carries with it the memory of a clash that changed the world. Rome rose upon Greece's broken spears. But Greece, even in chains, conquered Rome's soul. This is the paradox of survival. This is the lesson of conquest. This is the story of how Rome conquered Greece, and how Greece, in turn, conquered Rome. The dust has long settled. The bones of soldiers lie buried beneath fields that now grow wheat and olives. Rome stands victorious, Greece bowed. But the truth endures like a scar across history. Rome may have conquered Greece with iron and blood, yet Greece conquered Rome with memory and mind. The clash was not the end of Greece. It was its transformation. And through Rome, its legacy became immortal. The empire of steel swallowed the empire of ideas. But it was the empire of ideas that outlived them all. Rome broke Greece's body. Greece captured Rome's soul. If this story shook you, the next will break everything you thought you knew about history. Subscribe now, because the battles, betrayals, and blood of the ancient world are only just beginning.
What you just watched wasn't just history. It was a voice that refused to be forgotten. And there are so many more waiting to be heard. So if you felt something today, If the past reached out and touched you, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to Unique History Alive and walk with us, one buried truth at a time. Because history isn't dead. It's just been waiting for someone like you.